Well, let's begin with a picture. As by now you know I like to do. Yeah, tell the person next to you what that is. Yeah, it's a human skeleton. That's the picture. What's the principle? The principle is simply this. Every one of us has a skeletal structure. We, in fact, identify at times the person by relationship to skeletal aspects. He's the one with fingers like clothespins. He's stout. He's thick-boned. We are referencing aspects of skeletal structure to describe by some way the particularity of emphasis that will identify the individual. From what I've been told, and I'm no scientist, every adult has somewhere around 206, 207 bones. I'm not sure why we all don't have the same number, but evidently there's a couple of loose screws amid many of us. Just as every human body has a skeletal structure and marrow within that 19th century-like industrial factory that brings blood to the periphery, so too every preaching text has its own divinely inspired organization. Authored by the Spirit that provides the emphasis by way of original intention that ought to come to bear on the listener. In other words, then, each time you go to the text, if you want to be a Bible teacher, you ought to first apprehend for yourself the organization or the structure of the passage you're going to be trying to proclaim. There are many implications for this for the preacher, but Mortimer Adler, who wrote a book called How to Read a Book, said every book has a skeleton between its covers. Your job as an analytical reader is to find it. A book, he says, comes to you with flesh on its bare bones and clothes over its flesh. It's all dressed up. You must read the book with X-ray eyes, for it is an essential part of your apprehension of any book to grasp its structure. I love that last notion particularly. You are not apprehending the message of the book if you don't actually know the parts and how they're related to one another and the whole that they are trying to represent or convey. Now, that means that when you're going to be a Bible teacher, you're going to spend some time in preparation apprehending with your own eyes the organization of the material that you're speaking from. And when you begin to pick up on that, two things become clear. Let's do another picture here. What's that? That's a jellyfish. What's the problem with the jellyfish when it comes to its skeletal structure? It has none. And the Bible teacher who hasn't apprehended the organization or the structure of the material they're presented is very much like a jellyfish preacher. They come into the pulpit, they talk for a while, they leave, and there's no organizing principle to anything they had to say. That's why we're in the back greeting people and they don't know what to say when they greet you. Now, that's not the only problem. Let's get another kind of preacher. I'm just going to call him a crab. What's the distinctive of the skeletal structure of a crab? It's an exoskeleton. All you see is the structure. There are some preachers, in contrast to the jellyfish disordered one, the Bible teacher who gets so excited about the structure and the bones that they actually turn the preaching or teaching event into a discussion for you to see the skeleton itself. They never dress anything back up. The text lies naked before them and of no use in being able to walk along with them. So neither is preaching to be all about the structure, but certainly preaching has to have some organization, and therefore you need to know, if you want to be a Bible teacher, how to apprehend the structure for itself, which requires a prior question. You have to know something about the kind of literature you're teaching from. Why is it important to know what kind of literature you'll be teaching from before you even consider the strategies or tools whereby you might apprehend its structure? There are different kinds of literature. And depending on the kind of literature you're writing, you will adapt or utilize different styles of organization. So, then, ask yourself, how many kinds of text types of text, would I find available to me in the Bible? I'm not talking genres. I'm in prophetic literature and in Gospels and in apocalyptic literature. I'm talking types of text. How many are there? And what are they? Somebody give me one. One kind of text you'll find in the Bible. Narrative. These are storytellers. Much of the Bible comes to you in the form of narrative. Probably the majority of the text comes with that type. Somebody give me another one. Poetry. These are not storytellers. These are songwriters. This is particularly true in prophetic literature and in wisdom literature. When wisdom literature, which is the literature needed to grow the leadership over God's family predominantly, whether it's proverbial or in the Psalter, they use poetry. Somebody give me another one. Instruction. Yeah, I'm just going to call it discourse. Speech. Somebody's telling you something. These are really what's there. This is most often seen in the epistles. Somebody is writing something and directly by way of a speech or just straightforward writing, telling you something. There are storytellers, song writers, letter carriers. That's about it. Many books have these wedded together. When you go back and read Exodus, you'll notice that oftentimes discourse is as often used as narrative. You thought you were reading the story of the Exodus, but much of the type of text in Exodus is actually a speech. Now, these writers of these types utilize different strategies in the organizing of their material. So that's the next question for you. If you were writing one of these, or put better, if you're going to be teaching next week from one of these, what strategies would you use as a reader to observe for yourself the organization of the material. If I'm writing a story, narrative, what are the ways that I would organize my material? Somebody give me some strategies. What would I be doing? A plot. All stories run on a plot. A plot is often the organizing principle of a story. A plot has various aspects. It usually begins with a setting. The story is set. The conflict that the story is going to have to solve emerges. The conflict usually escalates throughout the story, either in degree or intensity, normally both, until what is reached? There's a climax, there's a climactic moment where that conflict is now going to be resolved in some way. The climax gives way to a resolution, and then you actually settle back down to what you would call stasis, or a new place of rest, or a new setting. But that's not the only way you could think about narrative. Someone has mentioned characters. Sometimes a writer will organize the story by allowing one character, in a sense, like in a play, to take center stage, or think of it almost as the way you see jazz musicians, or if you came to my city with blues, where one instrumentalist will give way to another, and they then take the lead and play this out, and then they hand it either back to another or a third instrumentalist. So this character, as it were, actually becomes the organizing structural way in which this thing unfolds. But that's not the only one. There's also another one. Anybody? How else do story writers go? I would just call it a literary feature, because there's so many different facets. They might have a scene change. There might be something temporal, like they organize it by the time marker. There might be something even geographic, where you're moving from place to place, and that becomes the organizing principle. So if you are going to teach next week from narrative, and you've been told that you'll be a better Bible teacher if you have some organizing principle to your understanding of the text, you now know 3 strategies that would enable you to get a better handle on the material in front of you. We'll go back through this in a bit, but let's roll it out to the next one. What about poetry? What strategies does a poet use? Imagery. And it's imagery connected to what? Idea. Poetry by nature is evocative or emotional. One of the values of poetry is it brings out something that other kinds of literature can't do. It's not surprising in prophetic literature when God is judicially in play with his lover who has left him, Israel, that he uses poetic forms of speech because it evokes the tenderness, the angst, the jiltedness of a love lost. So this imagery is connected to idea, and they wed that then to structure. We'll see that in just a moment. What about discourse? Question and answer. Often the questions are raised and then answered. I like that one. In other words, that's even going to deal with forms of speech. You're going to begin to center more on grammar, logic, subordinate clauses, major clause. This is the way This is the way all of that works. Now let's take the rest of our time, 35 minutes, and let me help you see this on a few examples so that when you go back to start teaching your own material, you'll say, okay, well, at least I've kind of seen it a little bit in action rather than just looked at it through a stupid drawing on an overhead. Let's take poetry first because it'll be simple and clear. Let's turn to Psalm 1. There are two ideas, two images, which when seen in the psalm provide the organizing structure. All right? How about the images? What two images seem to carry through here? The tree, and what's in contrast to the tree, that stuff that rolls through the village? The chaff. The tree and the chaff. One rooted, one rolling. If you live in a city like I do, my wife calls the plastic grocery bags that roll through the south side of Chicago urban tumbleweed. Two images, tree and chaff. The ideas are connected to what two words? The righteous and the wicked. See, the poet, the songwriter, is taking an idea, but he's, rather than just straightforward lecture style, he's breathing fullness into the idea of righteousness through the metaphor or the image of the tree planted or the chaff rolling via wicked. And then when you see that together, you can actually see the organizing relationship of the psalm as a whole. Generally speaking, you would go in what way? 1 through 3, and then 4 through 6, with the conclusion being how he brings them both together in verse 6. Now, I'm not arguing today for a tight linguistic control that I've landed on it and nobody could debate it. I am the practitioner, the preacher, the Bible teacher who has to find some semblance of the organizing principle so that my speech is moving. But I already know now, how many points is this sermon going to have? 2. Now, for those of you who are Southern Baptists, this is one of the reasons you're not expositional by nature. You don't want to force every talk into 3 points or 4 points or 1 point. You want the skeletal structure of the text you're teaching this week to control the movements of your message. And so on this particular week, you'd probably have 2 movements to what it is you're trying to create and 2 text divisions that provide clarity and simplicity for your listener, and 1 forceful emphasis that is being persuaded by you in the message. Turn to Psalm 23. And I'm taking these 2 because they're so common, it won't take us much time. Psalm 23. What are the images and the ideas? The images? How would you frame the images in regard to Matisse's opening of his talk? You're either in or you're out. The out image, this has nothing to do with membership or the body of Christ in that sense, but the first one is this outdoor image. It's this agrarian image. It's the farm. It's the pasture. It's the valley. It's a rod and staff. It's the image of a shepherd. There is this outdoor image of even the sense of being a sheep in the hand of the shepherd. Fascinating, isn't it? Because it's given to us by David. Even the leader of God's people is led by the shepherd. Even David is a follower, not merely the leader. And in that moment when he is really in in duress. I will call it humiliation, and has to be fearfully protected by the shepherd. David is saying, in my season of humiliation, in my years on the outside, having been anointed by God, but not orchestrating the affairs over the household of God, he sustained me in all of that. And then the image changes to that which is in, to the household, to the place of his reign, to the presence of God in the tabernacle, to all of these things which actually show the anointing and the goodness in his entire life. And the whole movement then structurally moves 1 to 4 and then verses 5 to 6. But they actually provide organizing material for the preacher. Do you see that? Now, if you pick up Paul's letter to the Romans and simply start looking for image as the organizing principle, you're dead in the water. Because letter writers don't organize that way. They use images all the time, but not as organizing limbs that have structural element to what they're trying to accomplish. Let's go from poetry to narrative. Turn to 1 Samuel 21. I mentioned earlier that in narrative you can go by plot and be of help, but it doesn't always help. You can go by character, be of help, but it doesn't always help. You can spend half an hour in your study looking at, for literary features, some of them even topographical or geographical. In this sense, that somewhat helps organize the material. There is a geographic, topographical marker that divides 21 very simply. It's a 2-part chapter, the structure of which is revealed through the literary feature of geographic scene change. This is organized into 2 movements. How does 21:1 open? Where are we? We're in Nob. And in particular, we're in Ahimelech's house, the household of God, where the bread of presence is. We're in Nob, but we are where? We are in the house of the Lord. 21:10, where are we? We're in Gath. What house are we in? We're in the house of God's chief enemy. Does that then make the sermon about a house? No. David is in the household, and David is in the household. God's anointed in the Lord's house. God's anointed in the house of his enemy. 1 through 9. What is the content there? What is happening for David in 1 through 9? Provision. He receives provision of at least 2 kinds. Bread and a sword. He's provided food and provision for the fight. How is that distinct from what happens in Gath? He's afraid, and what does God do for him in the midst of that great fear? Surprisingly, he provides protection, and really not even of his own doing. The enemy himself sends him on his way freely. The Lord's anointed provided for, in his state of humiliation, after being anointed, much like Jesus, David was given provision for his role and protection at the hand of God. So all of a sudden now the structure is pushing toward an emphasis that the sermon will be arguing. Actually, I'm beginning to know how to get to Jesus from here, but I'm also beginning to argue that if God provides and protects his anointed, will he not even in your death, both provide and grant protection for you. See? Structure reveals emphasis and provides help to the Bible teacher who's looking to ensure that they don't come across the pulpit like this, nor get so wound up in that they forget this is a living word for a people who need something from God. Let's take another one. We'll take another one. Let's go to the book of Acts. We're going to do discourse for a moment. Turn to Acts 5, 1 to 11. What is the structure? 5, 1 to 11. What's the structure? What are the two consequences at the end of each of those movements? You got death going on, and you've got fear going on. You've got death going on, and you've got fear going on. Simply put, you got a conflict that results in death and fear. You have the repetition of a conflict that results in death and fear. The conflict, what's the overall message then if you're preaching this next week? And why two conflicts? What's with the repetition? Why? What do we gain by repetitive force? I mean, this is almost strictly, for the most part, just let me tell you something and then let me tell it to you again. There's not a lot added other than the weight of repetition. What's the main propositional point that you go, this passage is teaching this? The Christian is not at liberty to play with God. And then it's, no, really, don't play with God. See, there's the repetition. And the stakes are so high. Now, you can do a lot of other things, but you can see how you're now, as the Bible teacher, helped in your sermon, not only by the organization of it, but by the potency of what it is you're trying to get across while you're in the lectern or behind the lectern. Let's do one more, and then we'll take a couple questions. Let's turn to Acts 11, 27 through 12, 25. First of all, let's look at 27 to 30, and then let's look way down at 24 and 25, the beginning and the end of the unit, literary unit. Now, I'm going to ask you to be reading along on your own as I'm talking. In 27 to 30, and in 12, 24, and 25, you seem to have a repetition by way of something that began and now something that ended. There is a relief mission begun by Paul and Barnabas in 27 to 30, and there is a relief mission completed by Paul and Barnabas in 24 and 25. Both deal with bringing bread to Jerusalem, correct, in the time of famine. But inset to that structurally is a fascinating structural element, this time not dealing with Paul and Barnabas, but dealing with Herod. In 12, 1 to 5, Herod is killing James and arresting Peter. But down here in 18 through 23, Herod is killing his guards, his own people, and not providing, interestingly, look at, not providing bread. Fascinating. They are coming to him in 20 and following, longing for their king to provide provision in the midst of their famine, and he is withholding it from them and killing the guards who let Peter get away. So while Paul and Barnabas are doing the bread thing, Herod won't do the bread thing, he'll simply do the blood thing. And in between both of these is now an incident that surprisingly isn't about Paul and Barnabas and isn't about Herod. It's about Peter and that fascinating prayer meeting in 6 through 17. Structurally, this is not logical, sequential progression structure. This structure is something is embedded in the middle that helps me make my way by way of comparison to the periphery. So what is it? What's going on in the middle here? Well, fascinatingly, there are three comparisons between Peter and Herod. You want to see them? First of all, they're both getting dressed. Take a look. The angel said to Peter, verse 8, dress yourself and put on your sandals. Now, at first glance, you go, what in the world is that about? Put on your sandals? Yeah, let me tell you why. All the way back up, where? Where would I find this? This is in the days, what? Verse 3, of unleavened bread. We got a famine and bread. We got Herod who won't do bread. We've got Peter getting his sandals on at the time of unleavened bread. You had to eat the Passover dinner with your sandals on because this is the representative moment of release and God's deliverance for his people. Right? And meanwhile, while he's dressed like that, look at Herod's dressing, verse 21. On the appointed day, his own day, Herod put on his royal robes, took his seat upon the throne, and delivered an oration. Here's Herod acting as though he is the divine God, almost like Pharaoh on his throne. Fascinating. Second correlation between the two, though, if I have time to do it, is the word voice. So how does the woman recognize Peter at the door? Verse 14. Recognizing Peter's voice. And what are the people saying concerning Herod's voice? When they hear his voice, you have the voice of a god. Okay, that's a comparison between the two. The third one is the killer. Well, literally. They're both struck by an angel, but the striking of the angel on Peter is for his deliverance. The striking of Herod is for his punishment and death. So, this is fascinating. Take a look at verse 7. Behold, an angel of the Lord stood next to Peter, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side. He struck him to release him. But now look, another angel, verse 23, an angel of the Lord struck him down. Now, given that structure, and you now have to apply this story to the welfare of your people, I used to think the whole story was about the importance of prayer. I mean, we learn a lot about prayer here, and Luke, I believe Luke intentionally likes to teach us that the early church had a lot to learn about prayer, but I don't think that's the value add moment for my preaching. Take a look at the final distinction between Peter and Herod. What made the difference between life and death, salvation and judgment? Peter's proclamation is to give praise to God for his work. What about Herod? What about Herod? Because he did not give God the glory, he was eaten by worms and breathed his last. Well, what an irony there. He now has become food. He now has become bread himself for the worms in the ground. What's the structure is so exquisite, isn't it? So amazing. and it presses home the importance for the Bible teacher to get hold of not this sense of don't play with God, but give praise to God for all things, because that makes all the difference. So all of a sudden the sermon moves from prayer meetings to praise. Why? Because as a Bible teacher, I'm learning that every text has a structure. Structure will reveal an emphasis. I wed my preaching to that organization and come home powerfully with the Spirit marrow intended point. So, you want to be a Bible teacher? Know what kind of literature you're teaching from next. Use a variety of creative strategies to discern clarity in how it's put together. Allow that clarity to push you to an emphasis, and then just get up and simply put it before the people.